You've been listening to the True Idaho News Podcast. Unfiltered news and opinion for the citizens of Idaho. Get more True News by visiting trueidahonews.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit trueidahonews.com/support. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. Shane Class here with True Idaho News. This, back in April, we had our Idaho GOP leaders announce that they were going to do their new D.O.G.E task force. And the new task force, it says, seems to consolidate state agencies, reduce travel and number of state employees. And they went on to say the Republican Idaho legislative leaders announced Thursday that they formed the Idaho Department of Government Efficiency, or D.O.G.E task force. But then they said it was inspired by, and I want you to pay attention to this language here. It says it was inspired by House Bill 364, an unsuccessful bill from the just finished 2025 Idaho legislative session. And so today, my real question is, if it was inspired by an unsuccessful bill, how in the world did we end up with it? And then Moyle and Anthon announced their teams. As I took a look at their teams, my very first response is this D.O.G.E or is this Dodge? Because they put some of the, in my opinion, worst possible people on there. The highest spenders are now the ones that are taking a look at themselves. So I had some questions about this, and this morning I called up Senator Zuiderveld to ask her just a few questions, and she seemed to have all the answers. And so at the very last minute, I asked if she would come on literally about 30 minutes ago. And graciously, she agreed to do so to kind of help unpack this and give us a little bit of a history behind it and how we ended up here. So thank you, Senator Glenneda, for coming on at the last minute. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Shane, and thank you. You know what? This journey has taught me how to be spontaneous. If it wasn't for last minute, nothing would get done.
Oh, shoot. So it's been kind of this year is going to be a wild and crazy ride. And I think as we get closer and closer to the new election cycle, it's going to get even wilder. But, help me understand. D.O.G.E task force. At first, we're going to have one. We're going to vote on it. Then we're not going to have one. We decided not to do it. Then Anthon and Moyle, I guess, just decided to ramrod this through. Where are we at? What's going on here?
Well, just to kind of give a little bit of a background, when Elon Musk came out and President Trump came out with their D.O.G.E task force, we, my caucus that I'm part of, the Gang of Eight, we actually were looking into trying to figure out how we can do a D.O.G.E here in Idaho. But our idea for D.O.G.E was to have it be citizen-based with a few legislators in there to help get the information. They find somebody who could be, the citizens looking into what their legislators are doing. And so that's what kind of started a lot of this. And then Representative Jaron Crane and Representative Jordan Redmond brought this bill forth that would create the D.O.G.E team, a task force for the state. And it never came over to the Senate side. It never made it all the way through. But on the House side, I think the vote was like 23 to 40. I can't remember the number, but it passed, with a lot of them actually voting against it because they realized that this task force isn't going to be any different than what we have going on with JFAC. And JFAC is a Joint Finance Appropriation Committee. And we go through all of this. We have our work groups. We get all the different presentations from our legislative services and from the director of legislative services. Keith Bybee is the one that kind of oversees a lot and gets us the information and works with us. And so this D.O.G.E task force is not any different than our JFAC team. And so to me, that's kind of where it began. And again, I have been against it because we don't need another task force. What we need is courage. We need to be bold and
Mm.
have a backbone to vote no on a lot of these appropriations in the committee during session when everybody can actually watch. That's the other problem with these task force is when you have a task force, it's during summer when no one's paying attention. This
Mm.
one's going to be on a Friday at 2 o'clock. So how many people are really going to
Wow.
be able to tune in at that time to see what this D.O.G.E task force is going to be doing for them? And then people can sign up to speak at this task force, and they only get 2 minutes to basically say what they would like them to doge about. And so that's kind of getting you up to date with the Doge.
I didn't know
And
those
they,
things.
and I would have to question the legality of it because it didn't even pass the full body, but yet leadership thought they could go ahead and put this Doge team in there, and they didn't even put the sponsors of the bill on this committee, which is interesting. I would like to know why they didn't add them.
That you brought up several different really good points. First of all, the point of having it done by citizens. That's what the federal Doge was. Because how this is just, and I don't want to knock on police today, but it just immediately that was the thought that came to my mind when you said this. It's like when a citizen has a bad encounter with a police officer, and so then they send their complaint back over to their investigative side, and it's kind of like, well, we've investigated ourselves and we found no wrongdoing, and that's what this sounds like. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put some of the biggest spenders in charge of Doge, and I'm going to go over those in a little while. And I went to the Idaho Freedom Foundation and brought up their spending index, and so we can actually take a look at who they've put on this in a little bit. But it just seems like, okay, well, we're investigating ourselves to see if we're doing a good job at spending or not, and how is this going to work out? It'd be like putting if Trump had, instead of getting Elon Musk, had decided to put Pelosi in charge. I mean, how good would this have turned out? But and then what I didn't realize is that, so they're going to do this during the summer, and they're going to have their meetings at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon while everybody's at work, or if they are off work, they've gotten off work because they're planning on leaving for the weekend. If you want to
Yeah.
hide, that's why I said, is this
Yeah.
Doge or is this Dodge? And
Yeah.
and it sounds to me, at my very first look at this, like this would be, if I wanted to cover up all of the nasty spending I'm doing, there's a big push from the citizens of Idaho to follow in the footsteps of our federal government on the Doge, which we never want to follow in the footsteps of our federal government. But this might be a good idea, and have a Doge team. It seems like we've got folks that are spending a lot of money that are afraid that we're actually going to form a good Doge team, and they said we better get in front of this and let's put our own together. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. And I don't know what their thoughts were behind picking this team of people, and personally they're nice people.
Yeah.
But as far as voting, their voting for spending has not curtailed much. And if you look at the previous 6 years, we've increased our budget 60% in 6 years. And so here you're gonna have a committee that some of them actually had been here for that long that have helped do that, but now they're going to stop themselves from voting that way. Wouldn't it just be easier to vote right and vote against suspending, or, that's kind of my thought pattern, and then here we're creating a Doge that's going to cost taxpayer dollars because they don't meet for free.
Yeah.
And the advisors that they have, the legislative services, they all get paid. And so this is costing the taxpayers to actually Doge what's going on. And and I just have to question again, What are they going to accomplish? Because, some of them, I always make a joke, and I've done this a couple times on the floor, where I feel like I'm a CEO for Idaho Corporation, because it's all about, you have to pass this because we got to keep the government going. We need this. We want this. And you get all this kind of pressure. So you feel like you're a CEO. And so I call a lot of them company men, because they will always vote to support more government than actually curtail that government to help the people out.
Yeah. So we threw this together. I had planned on talking about this morning, and as I was putting it together, I gave you a call, and and as you started just unpacking this for me, and I said, you just want to come on. So, folks, we threw some slides in here. We didn't have a lot of time to get organized, but a lot of good information. You sent me a couple things. First of all, this video. Do you want to talk about this video just a little bit before we play it, and then just tell me? You just kind of lead me through this really quick, and tell me what to hit play on, and let's just go.
Okay, so this is part of my questions. Why, this D.O.G.E task force, if they're not going to show that kind of ability to doge while we're in JFAC, then, what are we going to get with this new D.O.G.E task force? So what you're going to be seeing here is there's a presentation. In this presentation, we're doing motions for the employment compensation for all the government workers. We have a couple motions up there on the board. And when we're looking at the motions, and again, there's 20 of us on JFAC, 10 from the Senate and 10 from the House. And they're presenting these motions. But as I'm looking at the motions, the first motion came in, and then the second motion came in, and it said 4% or whichever is higher. And when you looked at the total of that total on that motion was less than the original motion. So right away in my brain, I'm thinking, if it says whichever's higher, that total should be higher. And so what you're going to see is me questioning that. But here's the interesting thing that just really concerns me. Why was I the only one that's seen that? Why? Because I kept leaning over to the different senators saying, shouldn't this one be higher? I kept asking before I actually asked the question of Keith Bybee. So this is what you're going to see here. And then this is the reason why I question how well we'll doge, because we don't doge in JFAC very well.
Yeah, you were doing the math, and the math wasn't adding up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a look.
Debating the substitute motion, and there were not any amended substitute motions. We made that decision. Go ahead, Senator Zuiderveld.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little bit confused here, because how is this substitute motion at 88 million and the original is at 177 million? How is it coming in less than the original motion?
Thank you for the question. Senator Cook, do you want to take that on, or?
Mr. Chairman, I might
go ahead, Representative Mr. Bybee.
Sorry, and members of the committee. The difference between those two motions is the substitute motion would take public schools as a separate motion, as I understand it. So it doesn't include that recommendation for $84 million that was part of the governor's recommendation. The CEC committee was silent on that one, and it probably doesn't belong with the CEC recommendation, but in order to keep things looking similarly, that's how it ended up in the original motion. That is the difference. So we need another motion either for the public schools compensation piece, or take that up as a separate time. So
does that answer the question? Okay, thanks for the question. That's a good one. Representative Tanner.
Okay, so they presented a lower number to be voted on than what the actual spending really was. Am I understanding this right?
So the two motions, from what he explained there, is we were deciding what kind of raise we were going to give the employees. Well, the first one included the teachers' pay in that, the increase of the teachers. The second one actually didn't include that number. And he was saying that we need to have a separate motion for the teachers if we accept the substitute motion. And so that's what he's explaining there. And then, thank goodness, Representative Steve Miller, he actually came to my defense and said, could we go at ease and you put that number into the second motion so we can compare apples to apples? And so that's what we did. But again, when you're looking at all of that, it's just interesting that I was the only one that was catching that. And so then in the next one, you'll see down the road that they put the number in with the teacher's pay into that second motion so we can compare. And then that's what you're going to hear on the second motion.
Okay.
Or the second video.
It's very misleading and doesn't reflect it very well.
Thank you, Representative Tanner. Thank you. Go ahead, Senator Zuiderveld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am still not convinced that that number on the substitute motion should not be higher than what the original motion is, because on the original it says 155 per hour, but on the other one it says 155 per hour or 4%, whichever is higher. So that is telling me that that number should be coming in higher than the original motion. Maybe you can explain that to me. I am a pretty simple girl, simple math, but it just doesn't seem like that's pinning out to me.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Bybee.
Can we go at ease, please?
Let's go at ease some more. And just a reminder, folks, we have...
Oh, I love it. I'm just a simple girl, but I'm glad I was muted during that because while that was playing, I just busted up laughing in the background. I mean, the numbers aren't matching, guys. And this is, and so, I mean, this is how our government operates, and they don't, I hate to say they do things on purpose, but it just seems like there's a lot of little shifty things that happen to try to, slide this in a little under the radar. And thank God we have people like you in there that are paying attention. And apparently you were the only one paying attention that day, and picked up on it.
And sometimes I think having that simplicity, because, to me, being on JFAC is simple math, because you're dealing with revenues and you're dealing with expenditures. So you're adding and you're subtracting. And so that's kind of how I see everything. And it just, and I think a lot of times too, that you could be there for a while, that you just get to the point where you just want to trust. And it's not that they're doing anything on purpose, but they're also human and they can make a lot of mistakes. And then we did go at ease for a very, very long time after that, and the numbers weren't right. And they said because of the rushed motions, again, we're rushing everything, and because of that, the numbers weren't right. So they pulled all the motions, and it took about 3 weeks before we end up voting for that. Because usually we like to vote on the employment compensation before we vote on the rest of the bills. And so we were able to just go ahead and go forward with a lot of our maintenance bills that we vote on, and without doing that. But it took about 3 weeks before we end up voting on that. But it was just simply I thought when I was voting on it, I was just feeling uncomfortable, because here I'm making a decision for Idaho and my taxpayers who are struggling. The inflation is getting crazy. People are struggling. And I thought I was just going to go along with it, because it's kind of fearful. You do have to have courage, and you're feeling a little intimidated. And so finally I just thought, but I wasn't sitting here to be intimidated, and you're going to vote on something that you really don't understand. You better start asking these questions. And that's kind of what led to that. I thought I need to know exactly how this is going down before I make a vote for my people.
Yeah. So you sent a couple other, let me kind of bring up this, the Permanent Building Fund. You want to talk about that for a moment?
Yes, so we actually had a summer meeting. JFAC met in Eastern Idaho to go over some budget items and just kind of see, they like us to see what we're funding and why we're funding it. So we do a big tour, and we did this during the summer. And this was in one of the slide presentations that was brought to us. And again, we're all sitting in a hotel lobby room, and they're discussing that. And this is a permanent building fund that is paid by the taxpayer dollars. But when you look at each one of those line items, and I know it's kind of confusing because this is me making notes for myself. Um, you can see their ending balance. But when I was looking at that again, I was thinking, gosh, that doesn't look like that adds up to me. That doesn't make any sense for me on those ending balances. So I took my calculator out and I started doing the adding and subtracting, and each one of it, and I tried two different ways. So the one like purple line is my totals. I came up doing it a certain way, and then I tried another way because I thought, well, maybe this is a possibility. So the green line is another way. So I tried multiple ways to come up with the number that they came up with, and I couldn't match it. So when we were in the meeting, I asked the question if they could explain to me how they came up with the totals, the ending balances, because everything I'm doing doesn't match up. And again, they were a little surprised, and they told me that they'll explain it to me later, because I says, I know that we're on a time schedule. I says, you can just explain it to me later, but it'd be nice to know how you come up with your numbers, so that way I know going forward how to do it. So then I did talk with the director, Keith Bybee, later, and he was saying because they were rushed, and again, the numbers weren't right. He said the numbers weren't right and that they were redoing that. And I thought to myself, if you were working for another company, if you were working for Amazon or Micron or Chobani, all these large corporations that have deal with millions and billions of dollars, would you still have a job if
Good
you
question.
and I thought, this is a lot of money we're dealing with, and so this is what we're dealing with in JFAC. And so my question is, being on this and seeing how this is all working, how is D.O.G.E going to be any better? Because they're still going to have legislative services giving them presentations like they do JFAC. They're going to be giving them the numbers that they give us. How are they going to do that? And so, and then I guess we'll go on to the next screens, and I'll share another reason why I'm concerned. So on these next screens, we have Transparent Idaho, which is supposed to give us everything that comes in and everything that goes out. We should be able to see on Transparent Idaho. We spent over 100 million. It's 100 million plus, because it's called a Luma program, is what we call it. And this program hasn't been performing, and so we keep putting more and more money into it. And so I'm digging deep in. I'm thinking, okay, everybody's, you go do line by line. They're challenging me, and I'm like, okay, I will. So I've been digging deep into Transparent Idaho, seeing if I can get my own numbers, because that's where Legislative Service, Keith, they get a lot of their numbers from the same source I do here with the State Controller's Office. And so when I'm digging deep and I'm pulling into trying to see if I can see line items, what I can figure out, this here is the Senate's budget. And if you notice, you can see that they have 2024's budget there. And when you click on that bar, it actually gives you some numbers. This is just a screenshot. But when you click on those bars, it actually pulls up numbers. It's an overview of the budget. It's not a detailed, but you can see that. But you see that the Senate has the 2024 line there. So do the next slide. So here's the governor's slide. So here I'm clicking on, so if you see over here on the one side, you can click on all these different agencies. I don't know if it's to my right or to your left, but over here, no, on the other side. So you can click on any of these and pull up, and it will show you the same chart. It all looks the same. Any one of those you click on, it'll bring you a chart. So I thought, well, I'm going to pull up the governor's and see what his looks like, and maybe I can dig into that. Well, now notice here that they don't even have the last 2 years of budget on there.
What?
So how are you going to D.O.G.E into anything when you don't have the information? And so then I thought, well, I'm going to continue to look. And I thought I'll stick with the legislative branch. If I'm going to point fingers, three's pointing back at me on the legislative branch. So I looked at the House of Representatives. And they don't show last year's. So again, how can we D.O.G.E and look into things if it's not there? So then I did send an email to the state controller's office to ask, why that is. And they said that they didn't realize that that wasn't up, that's a problem, and that they're going to look into it. And I have an email that I have there that shows that they are opening up a case on my behalf concerning those questions that I had. And Brandon Wolf is our state controller, and Tyler Kelly actually works there. He's the one I deal a lot with. So that was my question to them, and I sent them those screenshots so they knew what I was talking about. So they're looking into it. But again, if we're going to have a DOGE task force, shouldn't everything be working before we go and have a task force? Because how are they going to get this information, and what information are they going to get? So that was just one of the other reasons where I'm thinking, is this really the right time or for a DOGE committee?
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but shouldn't the numbers for a budget be in there before the year? Because the budget is what you set in advance, and that's what you abide by. So if we're looking at last year's, we're quite a ways behind of even having the numbers to know what they're supposed to abide by. I don't understand that.
So as your legislative branch, we do have the budget going forward. So if you look on the legislative website, we show what we're appropriating and budgeting. But this is actually the actuals of really what has been spent.
Okay.
But it's not there. So the state controller, all of that information is what, those line items, what has been spent, what has not been spent, what's come in. So those should be the actuals, but it's missing. So if we're going to DOGE and look back, if we don't have that program working correctly, how do you DOGE anything? So that's a question I have.
Yeah, I mean, I own a couple small businesses, and I've sat on the director as a director on a larger company, and that's and even worked with churches. But you have to have your numbers. That's the most critical thing in the world if you're going to operate efficiently. The thing that just drives me nuts about government is they have this attitude that, well, it's just not all that important. We can always get more money. We can always just get more money. And in a company, you only have so much money, and when it's gone, and you have to be on top of your numbers all the time. We would meet regularly, and each department head would go over, and each week we had to say, here's what my budget is for the year. This is what I've spent already. This is what I've spent it on, and this is my projection for the rest of the year if we continue spending at this rate. And then we discuss whether or not we need to increase that budget, or because, maybe we've made some decisions and we needed to increase a little bit of that budget into that particular department because it's, in my case, I was the marketing and business development director. And so if the marketing is bringing in more money than what we originally budgeted, you say, okay, well, let's increase your budget because you're doing a great job over here and you're bringing us more money. So you have to make those decisions. But if you don't have the numbers in front of you, you can't make those efficiently. And it scares the heck out of me looking at this to think that our Idaho legislator is running blind. If you don't know where you are, you can't do a good job. And so I think they need to fix that before they even start talking about being more efficient, because it's a good question. How can we be more efficient if we don't have accurate numbers to work with? And
absolutely. And
that's crazy.
100%,
I'm learning
Shane,
with you.
And that's kind of where I've always been. I look at it the same way you do. And, and I just want people to realize that your government, your Idaho state government's no different than your federal government. The only money that we have to pay those bills comes from your taxes, fees, fines. And then if they do, like on state property, they do investments, and, so there's that. But that's your main income, your main revenue that comes in. And so everybody's wanting a tax break. We want to cut sales tax. We want to cut our grocery tax. We want to cut property tax. But if we don't cut our budget, how do we pay our budget without your taxes? How do we give you that relief if we're not willing to go in there and tell the government, you know what, you don't need 60 new vehicles for health and welfare. You don't need this. We need to be able to go. Again, that's your DOGE task force right there. If we were doing our job we wouldn't have to have a Doge team if we were doing our job on that joint finance appropriation committee. And so, I just look at it that way, and there's just so many line items of waste. And so it was interesting. I voted no on a lot of your enhancements. I did vote for the maintenance bills, which keeps your lights on, basically, is what we're told. Is kind of it's a little bit more detailed than that, but that's what it took the year prior to run. So we're going to take that number and bring it over to this year to keep Idaho going. And so we don't look into that. So we don't even know what's working and what's not working in that maintenance program. So, but we vote on that to keep it going. And then we bring enhancements. With the enhancements, those are basically the wants above what is to keep Idaho going. And, and we did cut back on a lot of those enhancements. For example, the committee, health and welfare, they did want 60 new vehicles. But when we were looking at all the vehicles, I was starting to notice that a lot of the vehicles were really old, but they had barely 100,000 miles on them. So to me, it was telling me that they don't actually drive those vehicles a lot. So then we started questioning, do we really need that many vehicles? Well, it turned out that we didn't vote on those at all. They didn't get 60 new ones until they can show which ones they're using, how many they really need. Is this the best program? So guess what? We doged there. And that's how that is supposed to work if we're really doing our job. But again, it's hard to get a lot of that information and to make those decisions. And so if we can't get that information on JFAC, how are they going to get that information on the D.O.G.E team? And
Right.
if they can get that information on the D.O.G.E team, why haven't they given it to us on JFAC?
That's a really good question too. If we can get it for this department, why haven't we always had it?
Mhm.
Why aren't we
Yeah.
on top of it? And it just leads to, again, back to that questions that I have when I look at this. Is this really Doge or is this Dodge? Are we trying to cover up our little sins in the background, and we're afraid somebody's going to find them, so we better get our own people in there? Stop Idaho Rhinos on X. They posted this, and it was talking about who is going to sit on that. And I know you can't see this very well, but I'm going to bring this a little bit better for everybody. But apparently, Mike Moyle and Kelly Anthon have chosen their teams for the D.O.G.E task force, and they brought up some really good questions about whether or not. And I know you weren't this. I was putting the show together as an individual. I was going to do this, and so I put this together. So those out there, just before you get mad at Senator Zuiderveld for the slides that are about to come up here, you can get mad at me. I'm the one who put these together without her knowing where I was at, and I'm sure you don't have a problem with this. But I wanted to deep dive into what they were showing and see what are the scores. How have the people that are in charge of this D.O.G.E that they've put together and in charge of putting together the team, how are they spending? What's their history been? And then the people they put on their team, what's their history been? And Senator, I don't have any confidence in this team. When I'm looking at this, I look at Mike Moyle. We start with him, and this is from the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Again, they rate bills. They don't rate legislators. They rate bills. And Mike Moyle is putting this team together, but he has a spending index. This is his rating is an F. He spends like a madman, and he's going to be in charge of this for the House. And then the people that he puts on here, we have Jeff. Now he's got a 59%, so 60% of the time his vote on bills actually reduces spending, but that means 40% of the time it increases it. You've got Heather Scott. Now, if we go back to the letter that they sent wanting to keep Moyle, you can go back in previous guys. You can go back in our previous shows. Excuse me. And take a look. But if you go into the previous shows, you're going to see that Heather Scott and some of the other conservative legislators, and these people vote. Most of them vote very well, but there were some arguments and bickering going on. And I'm not going to get into this, but they sent a letter to say, hey, we want to an organization say we don't want you to put out any bad marketing against Mike Moyle. Because he's promised us a seat at the table. And so we think we can get a better seat at the table if we keep them in. So Heather Scott was one of those that put that on there, and she has a pretty good spending score. But as you're taking a look around at the rest of them, you have, let's just take a look here. We have Dustin has a 0. He always votes to increase spending. Josh has a 54%. So half the time he votes to increase spending. And then we look over on the Senate side. We have Kelly Anthon, a 9.1%. So his spending is out of control. But you're in charge of DOGE, Kelly? And then his team is even worse. Todd Lakey, he's got a 25%. It means 75% of the time he's voting to increase spending. Carl Bajorky, 18.1, which means, again, like 80% of the time he's voting to increase spending. Camille Blaylock, this is Luna's daughter, 18.1% spending index. Again, 80% of the time voting to increase spending. And then you have Carrie Semmelroth, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, 12.1%. That means nearly 90% of the time she's voting to increase spending. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is your DOGE team. So I guess, and I don't want to get you in trouble for being associated with me by asking this, but Heather Scott, how's that working out for you, keeping Moyle in there? So he puts you on there with a whole bunch of other people. What's your vote going to do for you when you're up against 90% of the people on this team? Everybody but you increases spending all the time. So Mike Moyle is just, I keep hammering on Mike, but he just keeps giving me more material to hammer on him for.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully, this is my hope. I'm hoping that, Representative Scott, she did get a seat at the table, and hopefully she will flip the table instead of just sit there. That's my hope for her, that she'll have the courage, because it's not easy to be the only one that's going to ask the questions and vote no. So hopefully she'll have the courage to do that. And I know a lot of them are trying to discredit Idaho Freedom Foundation and their scoring on spending, but I tell everybody, go and talk to Fred Birnbaum, who is like their #1 chief economist. He sits in on every single JFAC meeting. He knows, and he's been there way longer than most of us. So I would go and have you challenge him, talk to him. How does this scoring come? The scoring is very accurate. Idaho Freedom Foundation on their scoring on the spending is actually your DOGE team. That's your DOGE team right there, because they're the ones that are dissecting every single spending bill as it's coming in, as we're voting on it. And they have, again, a matrix that gives them a guideline. So they're not just willy-nilly out there saying, oh, we're trying to trap people in too, so we can, no, because they could care less who are in those seats. They want a better Idaho. They want an Idaho that is free. They want one that isn't growing government. They want one that we can give tax relief. That's where their hearts are at. And so I would challenge anybody, call up Ron Nate, call up Fred Birnbaum, call up their team of people, because they work hard to basically be the DOGE. That's your DOGE team right there.
You see me kind of looking off to the side here. I decided to go ahead and bring this up just to talk about this for a second. When you take a look at Idaho Freedom Foundation's website, you can go right to their spending index. And so if we look at the final 2025 index scores from the 2025 legislative analysis, you go right over here in the corner. And as a matter of fact, just for those of you who are looking at this on your mobile devices, maybe this is the better way. Let me see if I can back this up real quick. It's always fun when you're trying to do this live, but let me back this up here. Yes. Give it to me again. Here we go. So you can click on different indexes, and this says education, freedom, or spending. So if you click on spending and then look at all parties, it's just going to go ahead and give you a score. And you can go in here and search somebody's name. This is how I did this for you. But as you look at this, under the spending index, it's going to give you the best to the worst. So if you look at the best, look at this. Josh Cole, 100% of the time, he's looking to reduce or keep spending at its same levels. So they in fact, the Gang of 8 made a commitment not to increase any spending this year. Christy, 100%. That means that she's not increasing spending. Glenneda, you Great job, 100% of the time. You're voting right the way that we need to in a time when money is scarce. It's getting harder and harder to get by right now. And the last thing that taxpayers needs is our legislator to increase spending. You have Lucas over here, 100%. Clint Hostetler, 100%. David Levitt, 100%. My question is, Kent Marmon, 100%. Cornell, 98.6. That would have been a better choice. Fay, 97. So as you're looking at this, there were a lot of choices on here that they could have gone with that all had a 90% or better. And even, I mean, Tammy even came in at an 89%. I mean, you've got all these choices. So my question is, why are they choosing the spenders? And the only conclusion, if it doesn't make sense, there's a dollar involved. And the only conclusion I can come up with is that this D.O.G.E team that wasn't voted for, it's not brought together, it's not a citizen team, it's a legislator team made up of some of the worst spenders that we have to look and decide how we're spending. It's because you have things you want to cover up. It's because you want to whitewash it. It's the only conclusion that I can come up with, Mike and Kelly. And so maybe one of you wants to come on here and explain your choices. I doubt you will, but the invitation is open. If you want to come defend your choices, come on. I'll bring you on here and you can defend them. I'll give you that opportunity. I'm not here just to beat up. I'm really on here to understand and to help the people understand. And I don't understand it.
And you know what? It's interesting too, on that bill that didn't make it all the way through. It's House Bill 364. And on part of the bill, it talks about that the task force is set to operate through November 30th, 2029, extended or modified by future legislation. So it could actually be extended up to 2033. But then when you read in there, it talks about how you have to have the legislation. It says, that unless extended or modified by future legislation. Okay, well, it's funny that we have this task force that didn't make it through legislation, but to extend it, we'll need legislation. So I question really the legality of a lot of this. You know, are they able to go ahead and make a task force that did not make it through legislation? Because now to modify it in the bill, it says to modify or extend it, it has to go through legislation, but it didn't need legislation in the first place. And I've been looking at a lot of our task force that we have, and a lot of them don't have that, where it's been voted through on the legislation. So this takes money to have these task force. They get paid. So shouldn't the legislative branch, whose number one job is to appropriate money, have to go through that process to make sure that they are spending money on these task force? Shouldn't have to pass that? Maybe that's one of the number one things they should D.O.G.E. I don't know.
I think somebody ought to be looking into that. And again, to call this D.O.G.E is just really disingenuous to me, because this isn't D.O.G.E. This isn't led by citizens. The federal government one was led by citizens. Everybody that sat on that was a citizen. They weren't taking pay. They weren't costing money. They did this out of the goodness of their hearts for the good of our country. And that's not what this Idaho D.O.G.E is. This is put together by some of the worst spenders, and they've put the worst spenders on there, minus Heather Scott, who put her support behind Moyle to get a seat at the table. So he honored that, I guess, by putting her on there, but still didn't put anybody else on there to balance the scales. It's heavily balanced against her. I want to share
real quick too. So when it went through the House, the Gang of Eight that's on the House side, they all voted against it again, along with like 23 others. Cornell Razor voted against it because for the same reasons we're talking about here. Kent Marmon stood up on the floor and gave the reasons why this isn't appropriate, that should be something done during session in JFAC. He stood up, but because we learned later on that they were going to make this committee, he thought, even though I don't want it to go through this process, I would like to be on that committee if you're going to make it anyway. So he actually asked to be put on that committee and basically was refused because obviously he wasn't chosen.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I mean, he's got a good spending score. He's against spending. Again, you can only conclude when you have so many great, if you're going to use the legislator, which I I'm with you. I think this should have been a citizen led. This we would get that there's now you've got checks and balances. You've got somebody on the other side coming through and saying, well, are you really doing a good job here? And are there areas that we could cut? Are there areas that we could do better? But when you just form a committee of people from yourselves to decide whether or not you're doing a good job. It's hey, we investigated ourselves and we found no wrongdoing, and that's all this is going to end up doing.
The watchdogs watching themselves. And
Yeah.
and I just want to point out too, on that citizens committee, we didn't want it to be a citizens committee picked by the governor, by the leadership. This would, I don't know how we would have worked through that process or that application process of citizens to do it. But again, it shouldn't be a citizens committee that is appointed by your governor, because again, he's going to make sure that he appoints people that will turn a blind eye basically to some of this stuff that's going on.
Well, there was something else that I learned from a pastor one time. We'd have people that were grumbling and griping about things in the church, and he'd say, this seems to be on your radar. God's put this on your heart. Maybe you're a good person to sit on that, to take that up and to do it. And so I apply that. If I were to apply that same logic, and I think it's really good logic, if it's something that's really true on your heart that you're really digging into, maybe you should be, maybe that's God saying that you ought to be doing this. Well, we have a senator here, folks, that just showed that she has been looking at the numbers and questioning the numbers and has a heart for this. Why isn't she sitting on that board? Why wasn't she invited at that table? And obviously it's because they don't want somebody who's really concerned about it. That's the only conclusion that I can draw. Now, I'm not in their head. I'm making an accusation here that's speculative based on but the evidence seems to point that way. And I don't know, folks watching this right now, just ask yourself the same question. And if you think I'm wrong, put it down in the comment section. But it just doesn't seem to me like they really, truly have a heart to reduce government spending and get to the bottom of it and find ways that they can be more efficient. But we're coming up on an hour here. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add, Glenneda, before we finish this out?
No, I just think that, again, citizens, you need to pay attention. You know that there's a DOGE. So reach out to those that are on the committee. They have their emails out there. Probably some of them have their cell phone numbers. Reach them and say, this is what we would like to see. And think about what are some things that you would like to see. I did a Substack on it and I gave some ideas of things I would like to see. Let's look into launch. Is that launch program really performing the way it is? Is it really benefiting Idaho? Are we spending that $80 million wisely on that launch program? Is it going to U.S. citizens? Okay, let's DOGE into launch. Let's DOGE into our Medicaid program. Let's DOGE into that. There's a lot of things that we could really look into. But again, those are things that we should be doing during session. And unfortunately, a lot of these task force, I was actually on one. I was on the Medicaid managed task force last year. And personally, I think it was a huge waste of time. We listened to all the different health and welfare agencies. We listened to different like Blue Cross. You listen to everybody that's involved with that, and you hear their story, and then we come up with a suggestion that we'll bring back to JFAC to bring in suggestions for a bill. But again, why can't we do this stuff during session? Why do we have to have these task force? That makes us more of a full-time legislature. And is this a way to make us full-time without having to do a constitutional amendment saying that we want to be full-time? In Idaho, you don't want us there full-time. You don't want us there, because then that makes us good companymen for Idaho. We're going to be working for the state because we're there, and you're kind of seeing that. So I just think that a lot of your task force are a huge waste of time. And we can actually get more work done during session. Our first month is pretty slow going in session because they're waiting for your Joint Finance Appropriation Committee to get ahead, because that's our number one job, is the appropriations. The moment we're done with appropriations, we can sine die. We can be done. All the other bills will have to wait till the next year if they didn't get a hearing. That's our number one job. So the whole first month, we're kind of, the other committees are just hearing bills and doing other things and rules while we get ahead of the program so we can start getting that through the legislative branches. And so I just really, strongly encourage you guys to pay attention. You are the Doge. Go and click on that Transparent Idaho. What do I do on that? I literally hit and click on everyone, like, oh, this makes a little light come up, and I click on it. Everybody could do the same thing. Make your own decisions on what we're doing. You are our boss. You are our boss. You hired us to go and do a job. We should be doing it. We shouldn't have to be doing it full time. You don't want a full time legislation. That's what these task forces are making, is full time. And again, they get appointed by your leadership. So if you make leadership mad, you're probably not going to get on a committee. And that's okay with me, because I'm not there. I don't work for them. I'm not there to make their life easier. I'm there to make the citizens' life easier. And
Well,
so that's where we need to just keep fighting and keep putting that information. And I'll keep sharing everything. It doesn't matter how much flack I get. Again, I work for you, and I'll keep sharing what I know and keep fighting the good fight.
well, I've been talking to you about this over the last couple of days. What tends to happen when you're right over the mark, and when you're bringing facts and you're bringing information that people don't like, they're going to come after you. They're going to come after me. They're going to come after the rest of the gang of eight, and they're going to try to attack our character. And it's been happening over the last several of days. It's happened to me. I've got a group out there attacking my character. I've got a challenge for you, ladies. If you want to do what's right for Idaho, you can attack my character all day long, but you're not attacking the information. You're not even talking about the information. And the reason is because it's right. It's because it's factual. So my challenge to you is, go ahead, attack me all you want, but you're not disproving me. You're not disproving Glenneda. You're not disproving anybody out there, because you don't have anything to disprove. So my challenge to you is look into this information and then talk about it. Talk about the information that's out here. You're not hurting my feelings. Okay. I am who I am. And I don't live a perfect life. I'm sure you can find plenty on me. I can go out there and give you plenty on myself. I'm not embarrassed about my life. I live a good life. I do things sometimes that I look back on and I say, why did I do that? But the bottom line is I'm here for the people of Idaho to bring truth out to you. And so if you want to attack the truth, attack the truth. If you want to attack me, attack me. But it's just going to show who you are. Attack the information here today.
Want to say, Shane, on that topic, is when that's a liberal tactic. That's a liberal move, because when they start losing a debate, they are taught to attack your character, attack you in the personal, to get you off of the debate. And so you just keep bringing back the same thing that, let's talk about D.O.G.E. Let's dig into it. And, and when you're over target, I did have, so when I was voting no all the time, I did get called into the office saying, why are you voting no all the time? We thought you were only going to vote no on moral issues. And I'm like, this is a moral issue. I says, first of all, we are depending on the federal government that's broke. So who are we a slave to? That's a moral issue to me. Spending money we don't have is a moral issue. So that's the reason why I'm voting no. And they basically said, well, because you're not voting yes, you're making more work for the rest of the team. And I said, that's not my problem. That's not what I was sent here to make the rest of the team's life easier. We should all be voting and looking at this and voting no. And, we did vote no. We were able to kill some bills because they finally, and it was 1-19 a lot. But then pretty soon I had Representative Elaine Price started joining me and voting no on a lot of things, because we're like-minded. So she started getting in the fight. And so you had 2-18 a lot of times, and then pretty soon you had more. And then eventually we had where we were able to stop some things. But when you're listening to the work groups that we meet in, and just all the different things, you can kind of see who people work for. Do they work for the people, or are they a good Idaho company man? And so that's what you're dealing with. And it's hard to say that. And I know I get a lot of pushback, but prove me wrong. Please prove me wrong, because then that's only going to make Idaho better. That you don't work for the Idaho corporation, that you actually work for the citizens. Prove me wrong, please.
Yeah, that's just it. I would love anybody to look into the information that I'm delivering. And if I'm wrong, bring it to my attention. Please bring it to my attention. I want to deliver the truth. I want to be right. I want to give you good information. The people who watch this depend on me to do that. That's what the news used to be. That's what my dad was in radio for 43 years. And about half of that period of time, he had a conservative talk show. And one thing is, my dad is a man of impeccable character. Is he right all the time? No. Has he done things in his life that he's probably not happy with? Of course. Has he had things happen to him that seemed unfair? Kind of like me, things that happen that seem unfair, but you have to live through those things, and you have to grind through them. But at the end of the day, if you want to make Idaho great and keep Idaho, we've got to keep focused on the information, and so prove me wrong. Make sure that I'm delivering truth. Prove Glenneda wrong. Make sure that she's delivering truth. That's going to help Idaho. But if we get into the weeds, we get into the mud and just start slinging mud at each other and beating up on all the things that we've done in our past, we are missing the mark. And Idaho is just going to go right down the path of Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, all of the states that used to be great places to live. Now people are fleeing out of them. And we've got to get back to the basics. And so I'm not going to play mudslinging with anybody. I'm not going to lower myself to that standard. And I really hope that everybody will join on board and do the same thing and just focus on the facts. Yeah. And that's my challenge. So
absolutely. Senator, 100%. I'm with you, Shane.
Thanks for coming on here.
That's part of life. We make mistakes. We are all going through it. And it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the thing is with all of our trials and with our victories, are we going to let it make us better, or are we going to let it make us bitter?
That's right. That's right. And I can tell you what, some of the things that they've been talking about, I look back on it, and Marta and I were talking about this the other day, and some unfair things happened to me. And it's easy to get mad and angry and look back, and so there's some individuals did some things to me that just weren't right, and I ended up in court over it, and I'm not going to go into it and talk about it today, but it seemed really unfair. And you ask God sometimes, why did you let this happen to me? Where were you? Why weren't you there protecting me better through all this? And as I look back on it, I say that had to happen, because that day was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because what it highlighted in my life was I needed God's protection, and I had gotten a little bit too high-minded, thinking I can get through this life on my own and I can do things on my own. And it brought me back around to where I said, you know what, we need to get back into church. We need to rededicate our lives to God. My wife did the exact same thing. And today, I have to thank those people for doing that to me. And I know that sounds really weird, but I have to thank them for doing that for me, because today I have such a closer walk with God than I think I ever have in my life as a result of all of that. And so sometimes we look back on our life and we have unfair things happen to us, but when you look at it from a 30,000 foot overview and you take the spotlight off of it, I thank God it happened. And I really, honestly, I can say that. I thank God that happened to me, because I wouldn't be the man I am today without it. And I wouldn't have the relationship with him that I have today because of it. So sling your mud all you want, but all you're doing is you're just bringing back to mind one of the best things that ever happened to me when I have to look at it from that overview. So.
Yep. And it just makes us stronger and better.
It does.
So we're overcomers. Yep. All right, Shane. Thanks.
Thank you. You have a great day.